the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in. Standing in the gap, standing for Jesus. Standing in the gap for family and friends. Standing in the gap, one love for all, so we all can make it in. Studying to show ourselves approved, rightly dividing the word of truth, increasing our faith to envision our freedom, so we all can glorify our God.
Is that God loved this world so much that he gave his only begotten Son, and he put us in the midst of his word with a great commission, and the great commission is to spread his gospel to the ends of the world. And so in order to spread his gospel in this world, you have to be up to date on what's going on in this world. And therefore we have created this part of our ministry that we call the Gap News. And the Gap News brings you up on current events, things that are going on, and trying to put it in context with God, with God's word. And Marvel is in charge of that. I told you would see her again, and she has something I haven't even seen what it is. Gap News, but it's always good. Marvel, take it away.
So we struggled, and then I think some of us had to cry a little bit with everything that went on in the political scene last month. But now that's behind us. We're going to have to figure out what to do and how to do it. But you know, something that has been going on in the last couple of weeks around the world. And these are leaders who have led their countries the wrong way, who have been sometimes tyrants and sometimes murderers. I'm going to show you what might happen to a leader that, you know, does not put his people first.
Mark's report contains the footage of the aftermath of a chemical weapons attack.
For nearly 25 years, one man has dominated everything in Syria. Bashar al-Assad was the London-trained eye doctor who became one of the world's most ruthless dictators. The soft voice belied the brutality of the man and the regime he inherited from his father. The story of Syria under Assad gives the context for so much beyond. Chemical weapons and the red lines crossed. ISIS and their caliphate, a migration flow across Europe, Iran and their influence in the region. When Assad took power in 2000, there was a wind of change and hope.
Would you like to take the opportunity, Mr. President, on Sky News to invite Barack Obama to come here?
I will.
Opening up, engaging with the West, change maybe from the ruthlessness of his father.
He had a different trajectory for his life, slightly surprisingly came into the position to rule, but by all accounts, he knew exactly what he was doing when he got the chance, and he simply followed. It's not unreasonable to have tried in Western states to say, should you become the leader, here are opportunities for democratic rule. But the truth is, people do not relinquish power because they fear that if they lose power, it will end their lives.
But when protests swept through the Middle East, people demanding change from Egypt to Tunisia, in Syria, Assad couldn't tolerate it. The protesters had thought that they could do what others had, to topple their tyrant. But with his notorious secret police and compliant generals, he cracked down. A peaceful protest morphed into the region's longest civil war. America arming the moderate opposition and drawing red lines.
A red line for us is we start seeing a whole bunch of chemical weapons moving around or being utilized.
For a time, the Western powers seemed united against Assad, and to stop him too, they gathered in Geneva in 2012.
We consider it to be of key importance that there is no attempt in the document to impose upon the Syrian side any kind of transitional process.
He had one powerful supporter, Russia, and there was a symbiosis to the Putin-Assad relationship. Russia helped him and maintained its strategic military bases. For Iran, too, helping Assad allowed dots to be joined, an Iranian arc of influence which curved through the Middle East. 2013 could have been a turning point. These horrific images from the Damascus suburb of Ghouta shocked the world. Assad used sarin gas against his own people. The UN said it was the worst chemical attack in a quarter of a century. Obama's red line crossed. Britain brought a resolution to the Security Council to authorize the use of force in Syria. There wasn't agreement. Stung by disastrous interventions in Iraq and in Libya, the Western calculation for Syria was, in the end, just to let it play out.
Chemical weapons, for me, for the Assad regime, are absolutely synonymous with its evil. I've always said that I thought Assad remained in power because he used chemical weapons and because the West didn't really punish him for it.
The war continued, now a proxy war between the West and Russia, Iran, China too. A great power struggle for regional influence playing out as a country was destroyed. It was from Syria that the world first saw the brutality of ISIS, the hostages, the beheadings, the caliphate, terrorism exported, another extremism which tried to replace Assad's. Millions streamed out of the country, prompting Europe's biggest migration challenge since World War II. Syria's war and the West's choice not to intervene was now profoundly impacting politics in nations across Europe. Far-right parties thriving as liberal governments did what they thought was the right thing, to let refugees in. In 2017, Assad did it again, another chemical attack. This time it was Donald Trump in the White House, and with British and French support, he authorized airstrikes. A message, but not a turning point. Assad remained in power, and over the subsequent years, the resistance movement would be cornered into small pockets of his reclaimed country. By 2023, a remarkable resurgence and resilience drew him back into the fold. No longer the outcast in the Middle East, the reception for him at the Arab League meeting was warm, an acceptance that he wasn't going anywhere. And yet, a year later, it is all over. After well over a decade, in the end, it took just 12 days, a byproduct of the tumultuous events in the region over the past year. All of this happened because of a confluence of moments. Israel's destruction of Assad's backer Hezbollah in Lebanon and bombing of Iranian forces in Syria. All of that flowing from the Gaza October 7th attacks. Then there is Ukraine bogging Russia down. It could no longer help its ally in Syria. And America's political vacuum too, between one president and the next. It was space to make a play.
What happens in Syria doesn't stay in Syria. And so the potential prospect of a resolution being around the corner is an enormous hope. At the same time, with everything up in the air, the potential for Syria to go down a Libya-like path, potentially holds a great deal of challenges and threats for the rest of the region going forward. So again, the need for diplomacy to get started at 100 miles an hour right now is absolutely urgent.
Donald Trump is not yet president, but he is now the lead player on the world stage with a style few can predict. In Paris, as Syria unfolded, he said it wasn't America's problem, but then within 24 hours he was drawing the lines that link the geopolitics. And so the long war is over. A dictatorial dynasty has gone, and with it, regional power has shifted profoundly. What matters now is what follows, how Israel, Turkey, Iran, Russia, and Trump's America respond. An inflection point indeed. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
So video to our monitors takes us to protests in South Korea. The people you're about to see want the Korean president impeached after he declared martial law last week, shocking a lot of people all around the world. CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio reports opposition parties, they are determined to boot the president and find a new way forward on the Korean peninsula.
South Korea's opposition Democratic Party legislators have vowed to hold an impeachment vote every single week until President Yoon Yeol is impeached, riding a tide of anger that we witnessed with our own eyes Saturday night at a massive rally outside the country's legislature. That's the National Assembly. It's estimated about 150,000 protesters had gathered from across the country to pressure lawmakers supporting the president to impeach him. And that's because he declared martial law last Tuesday in what appears to be a huge miscalculation to consolidate power, to try to break political deadlock with the Democrats, and blaming North Korea, but still with no evidence that he has provided. But that impeachment vote on Saturday failed because most of the lawmakers of the president's own ruling Conservative Party walked out of the chamber. The Democrats chanted at them to come back, but they did not. And that meant there weren't enough lawmakers to even qualify to hold a binding vote. Before that, I interviewed the Speaker of the National Assembly. His name is Woo Won-shik, and he said that South Korea's democracy is not that fragile. Take a listen.
That's why we won't retreat. We will risk everything, even my life. South Korea's democracy will continue. It will be difficult for any forces to regress the country's democracy.
And South Korea's democracy has existed since 1987, born out of repressive authoritarian governments who used martial law themselves. And that's why so many South Koreans were so enraged, because the president's own martial law declaration brought up horrors of the past. Now, the next vote to impeach the president is set for this Saturday, but this political K-drama, if you will, could last weeks, months, and possibly even years through 2027, because that is when the next presidential election is currently still scheduled for. Back to you.
CBS News foreign correspondent Remy Inocencio, thank you, my friend.
So, isn't that interesting? These are, first of all, the South Korean president is in a democracy, but he's trying to become an authoritarian. So he just declares martial law, and it did not work out that well for him, did it? And then, of course, Syria was just a brutal dictatorship. And he was so terrible that he would just gas his own people. I mean, I don't know of any worse leader in current days times to just kill his own people because he didn't want them to protest. But you see what happened in both cases. It did not work out well for them. You got any thoughts on that, honey?
Well, one thing is that what you see here is what happens when a leader turns on his own people.
Yes.
And did not work out well, though Assad got help from Russia and Iran and all that, and he was able to hang on. But his actual presidency was dead when he first used those chemical weapons. It just dragged out a long time, and it was kind of strange because it happened so quickly. I mean, you know, they say they're going on Aleppo, and next thing you know, they're in Damascus, and next thing you know, he's fled to Russia. And
He's fled to Russia.
Goodness gracious, that was quick.
And a lot of it had to, I mean, it was a really, what do they call it, geopolitical thing that happened, because when Israel toppled Hezbollah and attacked Iran, then Iran was kind of preoccupied. And then, of course, Russia's over here, you know, invading Ukraine and everything. And so they're kind of preoccupied. And so when this happened to Assad, his two buddies weren't there to help him. So he had to flee.
Well, like I said, I always go back to Micah 6:8.
Oh, yeah.
It says, you know, what's required of you? What's required of the government over there? Whatever government, they all come.
All the governments.
Authorities come from God.
Yeah.
And to do justly. And he was not he had no justice. He had no mercy with the chemical weapons, and he was not walking humbly at all. And so you see what happened. Then the guy over in South Korea pokes his little authoritarian head up and like guacamole, bam, you know. So when all these leaders have to be careful about how they deal with their own people. A lot of times they're worried about some outside influence coming in and all that. The question is, how are you dealing with your own people?
That's the whole thing.
And God won't be mocked either.
No, he won't be mocked. What you reap, you will really, really sow it. And I just think these two stories, I hope that our listeners and our students are paying attention to this, because this is a lesson for America.
Absolutely.
If our leader turns against us, the last thing I heard, this leader that President-elect Trump ran on, I'm going to take the prices down. Groceries are too high. I'm going to make them lower. And now this week he said, well, it's hard to do that. That's just that's a small one. I mean, groceries aren't going to kill us. Groceries aren't going to take away our health care. Groceries aren't going to eliminate our Social Security or fire 20, 30,000 government employees. But let's just keep our eyes on what's happening, because we are not powerless in this country.
Stranger, he says it's difficult to do that. Well, one of the reasons is that the food industry and all that is controlled by a bunch of billionaires, and it's hard for him to go up against billionaires when he's patronizing them and all that kind of thing. So the difficulty may not be in what he's saying. You always take it with a grain of salt when he says something. Is that a lie? Oh no, that sounds like a lie.
Well, I mean, really, because the corporate farms are controlling the production, and then here we go. You're gonna put all the immigrants that work on the farms out of the country. Then who's gonna even harvest the food? You can't get the prices down that way. And then you look at the price gouging. Vice President Harris was going after that because it's happening, but he wouldn't care anything about his billionaire friends gouging prices for all these folks in the middle class and the lower classes.
Absolutely not. Well, thank you for the Gap News.
That was a good one, wasn't it?
That was good. You keep us in contact with what's going on in the world and keep our minds in perspective.